We're just going to take a quick look at some of the stages of adolescent development, but particularly for young adults, because there are some changes that happen between 18 to 24 that are important to understand. Most of this material, if you look on page 11 in your implementation guide, most of this information is taken from the MIT Young Adult Development Project, which has been taking some time to specifically look at the needs and the characteristics of young people 18 to 24. And we really liked a lot of what they had to say, and even as you were going around, I think that you'll see some commonalities with the way that they describe them. I will not, thankfully, read all of that to you, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. If you'll notice on the slide and even in the handout that we've given you, I did include some information about adolescents, early adolescents and middle adolescents, because just because they are 18 to 24 does not mean that that's necessarily where they are developmentally. So it's important for you to understand both the characteristics on the younger side of that spectrum and the older side of that spectrum. A couple of quick things. There are categories here for cognitive development, their moral and problem-solving frameworks, what they're doing emotionally, how they are relating interpersonally, and decision-making and risk-taking. I just want a couple of things. There's a phrase that they used at MIT that I thought was very helpful. They described young people's mental visor. Anybody ever worn a visor? You can admit it. I know it's a fashion faux pas. We're not going to take pictures of you in it. But back in the day, or maybe your mama wore one, but a visor blocks something out. It'll block out sun. Depending on the color of it, it might even block out certain colors. It might block out blue or green, and suddenly the world looks a little bit different. The way that we think about adolescent development, and particularly for young adults, is what are they capable of keeping on their mental visor? What can they actually see? And what that really means is that there are some things that they can see and some things that they just can't, not yet. So for example, abstract thoughts. Concrete things, what's right in front of them, what I see, what I know, what I can touch and what I can see, I can do that. Abstractions like fairness, friendship, future are sometimes a little bit more challenging. It takes a while for that to come into view for them. It's also difficult for them emotionally sometimes to keep their needs on their mental visor and your needs at the same time. It's just kind of like, well, it can only be one. It's either or. Either everything is kind of extreme. There's only right or wrong. That's what you see in that first category, right or wrong framework. Either I'm right or you're right. Either I'm wrong or you're wrong. It's a little hard for them to see both and. That it is possible for us to both be right. It is possible for us to both be wrong. That evolution in their thinking doesn't come along until later, early 20s. So if you've sometimes had a discussion with a young person where you're just sitting there like, as my grandmother would say, she's 105 almost years old, you are just the most hard-headed child I've ever. It seems like they're very stubborn and stuck in their thinking. And in some ways, that is what happens for them developmentally. As they get a little bit older, they develop the capacity to think of more than one concept at a time. I also want to mention, someone said they're emotional and needy. There is an emotional intensity early in their developmental process that they cannot escape. One of the researchers described it as kind of having an accelerator and no brakes, so that they pick up on their emotions very quickly, they lead with their emotions, they're very prominent, but they don't necessarily know how to regulate them right away. I remember hearing my parents, as I was growing up, talking about how could kids get so upset when somebody steps on your sneaker? And I was an adolescent at the time, and my reaction was, because you stepped on my sneaker. There is this it's concrete, it's right in front of me, and I have an emotion about it, And the fact that it may seem overreaction to you, I can't see that. Right now, I can just see my emotions. Interpersonally, I just want to explain this really quickly. You'll see instrumental relationships and mutual relationships. Instrumental is just as it sounds. It's kind of a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back way of relating to people. It's very transactional. As they get older, they become a little bit more mutual, and the relationships become based on shared values. I actually hang out with you because we like the same stuff. I like coming to Justice Corps because I like what they say and what they do. That starts to move a little bit. I'm not going to go through too much more. Sensation seeking is just as it sounds. One of the researchers referred to it as having a supercharged car with an unskilled driver, which is an exaggeration, but simply saying that there is this rush of a need to take risks and rewards, and a lot of that has to do with their brain development, which we'll get to in a moment. But I'm just going to pause here and just looking at a few of these things, that they have difficulty regulating their emotion, risk-taking and decision-making is difficult. Are there any questions or thoughts that you've had, or is this resonating in terms of the young people that you know? These are the folks you know. Yes, sir. Yeah. So why is it important to know this? Because you work with young people. That's one reason, absolutely. Yes.
Understand better, definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tanaja, the help you understand them better was his response.
Because it's important to remember to look past the surface behavior that we deal with on a daily basis. You know, we get the SMDs and the FUs a lot. You know, I have to thank John to tell me what SMD means because I didn't know what it meant. But like all those things.
It's just important to think past the surface behavior that we see on a regular basis. Some of the shouting, the yelling, the cursing at us. And to always be mindful that young people may be responding to things that are outside of the program. You know, young people may have, you know, their mental visor off and be only thinking about, well, I need to eat today, or I didn't eat last night, you know? So you have to think past some of the behavior to recognize the needs.
Absolutely. Yes.
I like seeing that there appears to be a...
Todd Miller, Queens Justice Corps.
Hi.
I like seeing that there appears to be a way out of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, there are people kind of say, you have to understand them. You have to, no, they have to understand us.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that there's a way to do it.
There's an evolution for all of us. And there's an evolution for young people. I've often heard people sometimes, what is wrong with you? The question is actually, what's right with you? This is actually a lot of the things and a lot of the behaviors that you're seeing are the right behaviors for their developmental period. That's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. I want to put up a couple of caveats around this developmental stuff because people have a tendency to sometimes think that it's fixed when it's actually not. The advent of a new skill, meaning that a young person, you ever see young people have a light bulb moment where they're like, you know, I lost my temper and I've really got to do something about that. I got to learn how to manage my anger. And you're like, yes, they finally get it. And then the next week they're turning stuff over. The advent of a new skill does not mean that they will use that skill all the time. It just means that it has now become an option. It now means that they're aware that I can use that as a choice. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to do it, but it's now an option. The other way out, practice and opportunities to learn new developmental skills can make a difference. How do you learn how to do something? Practice. How'd you learn how to ride a bike? Practice, doing it over and over again. So our role is to give young people opportunities to learn new skills. If somebody lost their temper once, then they get an opportunity to fix it. They get an opportunity to make it better. And the last thing I just want to add is individual differences can accelerate development or result in a young person getting stuck. The point is that culture, age, gender, trauma, sexual orientation, temperament, how they were raised, mental illness, substance abuse, all of these individual circumstances can change how quickly or how slowly young people move through their developmental tasks. So for example, you may see a young person who interpersonally, the way that they relate to other peers and adults, it's like they're one of your peers. They're very mature, they can regulate their emotions, but they still take crazy risks. They still put their lives in jeopardy in ways that surprise you, considering how mature they are. I thought she had a good head on her shoulders, are some of the things that we might say. She might in one area of her developmental path, but in another area, she may still be working on something. Is this making sense? All righty. It's a lot of information. Please take time to look through that. And I just want to say quickly about accelerating or getting stuck. There may be circumstances that make young people accelerate to the far end of the spectrum, or make them get stuck in the early end of the spectrum, so that's to be expected. I just want to talk very quickly about brain development. Remember I said before that there's this sense that they're accelerating without any brakes. This is what I think is a slightly cruel trick of nature, but we all experienced it. And if you look on the next page, should be page 13 in your implementation guide, there's an overproduction of gray matter that happens when you're about 11 or 12. So your brain just starts thinking and going and thinking and going. The part of the brain that receives reward from risk kicks in early adolescence, okay? So the part of your brain that says, yeah, that little cigarette, that looks good. Yeah, man, smoke that, that's good. The part of the brain that says, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and roll with this crew, even though I think they might be a bad idea, kicks in early. However, the frontal lobe, which actually regulates risk-taking, regulates aggression, impulses, and engages in longer-term thinking, does not kick in until much later. It does not kick in until much later. So that is why researchers often say the accelerator kicks in long before the brakes do. So again, it's important to know that some of this is just the evolution of their brains. Adolescents think mostly with the back of the brain, which is where the emotions are. That's where they lead. And there's evidence showing now that the brain continues to evolve up until 25. So you're working with people whose brains are still developing. They're still developing. Now, I'll tell you the truth. We did this with a group of correction officers, and one of them responded, so what you're basically saying is that young people are brain damaged. No, sir, they're not brain damaged. They're no more brain damaged than you or I because our brains went through the same process. It simply means some of this we can't take personally, and some of this we just need to increase our awareness about. Any questions about that? Any questions? Yes?
It might sound kind of blunt, but that kind of lowers the expectation. Because for me, it kind of lowers the expectation. Like, I got a standard. I said, I'm a site supervisor, and I expect things to get done, right? And now, as I've taken this information, so many people just don't have the capacity to follow through. They haven't developed yet. And see, we're dealing with 18 to 24, right? But the ones that's 18 to 24 that hasn't necessarily developed in a timely fashion because of that baggage we talked about earlier. So I'm really dealing with people with adolescent. What's the actual term you used? Adolescent, puberty through 18. So they might be 18 and 19, but they're thinking like they're 14, and I'm expecting them to act like an adult. Ooh, so maybe I need to pump my brakes. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. However, you wanted to say something?
I'm Stephen from the Bronx side. So to your point, I think this information gives us a time to reflect. And we spoke about in our group about, it's all about the approach. And, so as we work with these young people, finding something that you connect with them, and then, kind of using that as that segue into whatever conversation and building that relationship, and then, then the expectancy, the expecting what you expect of them comes out, and working with them to get to their ultimate goal. So to your point, definitely reflection mode.
Yes, got it.
Again, to his point, how do you balance holding them, understanding adolescent development, but also holding them accountable to being self-sufficient and promoting responsibility and accountability? So I ask you all, how do you balance that? Because we struggle with that at our site.
You and everyone that's ever worked with young people, okay? Sanaja, you want to respond to that?
I think some of it, and like the real crux of it, is creating realistic goals with a young person. And then sort of you have to accept that you're there to model the behavior. If they had the ability, or if they had the capacity, they wouldn't be in our program. You know what I mean? So on a certain level, this is what we should expect to deal with. And so a lot of it requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires a lot of like letting your hair down and supervision with your boss. Like, oh my God, if I could be 16 for 2 seconds. You know what I mean? But it's about, that's exactly it. You have to model, you have to accept the fact that you're here to teach and you are here to build the capacity, and then help the young person set realistic goals. If you have a 4th grade leading level, I'm not going to help you prepare for college. Like, it's not a realistic goal for you, and you may believe that, and so you got to accept that. All right, so if you want to go to college, you're going to have to look at these CUNY assessment tests, and you're going to have to do some studying and whatever, because the goal is for the young person to realize, I need more preparation, or I need this or that. You know what I mean? So it's sort of, you counsel, you help clarify young people's options, you help them assess themselves, and then you help them create realistic goals.
Yeah, my name is Jonathan. I'm the senior worksite supervisor in Queens. Just to touch on what the brother said over there about dealing with them at work, right? I don't think it's more so of lowering our expectations. We'll always have expectations on the work sites. I think it's more so of meeting the individual where they're at, right? And then creating different expectations, their expectations of what they want to get done, but then working towards them getting to fulfill our expectations, which would ultimately be their expectations in the long run, and wanting to complete and learn a skill and be able to do certain things. So more so just meeting the individual where they're at, because each individual is different. Each participant we work with is different. We'll have some who come into the work site and we'll never have to tell them anything. They'll get the work done, they'll have all those skills, and that just comes with the individual. But then there's some who you have to talk to 5 and 6 times throughout the day, and you're like, why do I have to keep telling you this? Like, I just told you this like 5 minutes ago. But it's that individual, and that's the ones who require just a little bit more. So understanding that, and then, working towards their goals with them, and trying to fulfill the program goals as well.
All righty. I'm going to have to move on, but I do want to, I think you just said that very well, Jonathan. The key is not to lower your expectations. Absolutely not. The key, however, is to manage how you help them meet those expectations. So if you were trying to teach a child how to ride a bike, you wouldn't suddenly say, well, you can't ride one, ever. You would never say that. You would simply say, okay, I'm noticing that this is hard for you, so let me try this tactic. I want you to just try to ride from this house to this house. Now I want you to try to They want me to stop talking. You may just stagger the way that you work with them, okay? And another important part of why we talk about this is for you, so that you don't take things personally. They're not trying to challenge you. It is the task of their development to challenge and to test boundaries. So we'll continue to talk about this as we move on. I need to bring up Annie to talk about youth needs, which is also a powerful context for young people, and what drives their decision-making and behavior.
So Sabrina got us started by thinking about kind of adolescent development, the development of where your young people are, and we started to think a little bit about context. And I think back there just started us off by saying, there's some challenges that young people face even outside of our programs that kind of come in. And that's something that we hear all the time. So I kind of wanted to start there in terms of something that a lot of folks were talking about when we ran around and visited sites, which was around gang activity. So one of the things, I just want you to popcorn out. We don't even have to send around the mic. But just actually first at your tables, in your partners, turn to a person and talk about why do young people join gangs? Protection. That would be helpful, yes. Belonging, stability. Hold on one second, I got some help up here. Belonging, stability, security, keep going. Family, power, acceptance. Connecting to something bigger than just themselves. You got that? I think we might just say connection there. All right. But thank you. That's important. Ownership. Shared struggle. Fear. Love. Fear and love. Pride. Pride and generational. Obligation. What? Fear's up there. Fear's there. It's right here. Fear. We got fear. We heard you. Fear and more fear. Okay, anything else? One or two more? We got it? Security? And money. And information. Okay. Affirmation. Ooh, it's quite a list. Ooh, lots of reasons, right? It's complicated out there. All right. So I had you do this because I wanted you to think about how young people are getting their needs met, right? We talked about developmental stages, and what I wanted to kind of transition into is the idea that young people are going to get their needs met regardless, so in positive or negative ways. And it was very easy for you to come up with the reasons that young people join gangs. These are their needs, right? They need to belong, stability, family, pride, right? So young people are finding ways through gangs to get these needs met. And our charge as youth-serving organizations is to create opportunities to have those needs be met within our context. So just take a moment on page 14 and look over the universal youth needs. And as you're reading those, think, is it similar or different to what we wrote up here? Okay, any responses? I heard you talking, so I'm going to put you on blast here.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, again, Stephen Anderson, Bronx site. I was saying very similar. You could take safety as protection and compare some of the words. So it's very similar to this.
Any other responses to what you saw? Here you go, Crystal.
Yes, Crystal from Bronx location. When you mentioned similar or different, I thought you were actually going to follow up with us. And I feel like we all have the same needs. I think it's universal needs altogether. And the us and them conversation that's been happening since 9 a.m. has been really causing a reaction in me. And I think that's because our approach to them creates the response that we're receiving, and we're like, it's a problem, but we are enforcing that power struggle, knowing that they're anti-authority. So I'm kind of like a little frustrated over here, but I know that the us and them talks helps to facilitate conversation for the day, so I understand. Yeah.
So we're forgiven, but I think that's a really important point, that part of youth development is really about youth voice and really understanding where young people are taking leadership and ownership in our projects, right? So it's not about what we're providing to them, but really creating opportunities for young people to thrive, right? And I love what you said about those being universal, right? Because my boss is here, so I'm going to say I definitely need safety instructor, belonging, membership. We need these in our jobs too, right? We all need these. These are universal needs. And so I love that you kind of reconnected us back to, it's not just young people out there, but we're thinking about the development of all people, right? Wonderful. Thank you. So that was a really good point to kind of recenter us as to why we're here and kind of how we're connecting and thinking about our young people. And I think I won't take us too much further into this, but we just wanted to raise this to help you think about young people, again, are going to get their needs met in different contexts, positive or negative, and maybe a combination of both. Maybe those young people, we know you have young people who are in gangs and also in your programs, so maybe they're getting a mix of their needs met, right? Or in church, in schools, in family. And so the idea is not that you're going to necessarily be able to kind of be all things to your young people, but to really be intentional about your programs and how you're setting up your work and how you're interacting with young people so that you are meeting those needs that Crystal just said that we all need to have met. And then to really be thinking about behavior, that behavior is driven by needs, right? So to be conscious, I think Tanaja was starting to go there, to be conscious about when behavior is happening, kind of checking ourselves, why is this behavior happening? What need isn't being met that I need to be thinking about? So really kind of putting the onus back on us and thinking about how can I meet this young person's need?